If you would, read with me from the book of Revelation, chapter 20, verses 11 through 15. That's Revelation, chapter 20, 11 through 15. Then I saw a great white throne and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which was the book of life. And the dead were judged from the things which were written in the books, according to their deeds. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, every one of them according to their deeds. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire.
These books are opened, and it's the scene of Judgment Day, isn't it? I'm going to be there. I've written in my Bible that I'm going to be there when these things happen. And I look out across those of you who are gathered here today, Paul and Wendy down front. You're going to be there. I see Miss Eileen and Miss Kenny. They're going to be there. My good friend Miss Peggy, she's going to be there. Justin, Genji, going to be there. Why do I say this? Why did I leave some out? Not on purpose. I'm saying it because in a lesson that is this serious, if we don't take it personally, if I don't listen to the preaching of this message and think about how it applies to me, and that this is very personal, and I'm going to face this one day. If I think like sometimes we do, I hope such and such hears this lesson, they really need it. Look, that's a mistake. We have to take this intensely personal, because all of us at the very same time, we're going to be here one day. So I hope that as we spend a few minutes looking through a very uncomfortable subject, and one that certainly, as Charlie mentioned, this cancel culture nonsense, that we recognize our world laughs and scoffs at what we're going to say this morning. They say that's a fairy tale. It's not from a God of love, which we'll talk about, that it's just not real. Friends, this is real. And I better believe it's real. Unfortunately, for those who don't, one day they'll see that it's real. I don't want that to happen. That's why I stand before you today and preach the message. And so as we've gone over for the last several weeks, we've talked about why in the world be baptized and all the things that go along with it. And one of the reasons, and probably the main reason that many of you obey the gospel, is because you heard a sermon like this one, or someone took you to the text and they showed you what is waiting for those who do not obey. What's that place going to be like? Now, I'm going to tell you, next week we're going to go and we're going to talk about the place that I expect all of us are going to go. The good place, heaven, right? This week, though, we've got to talk about the other place, the only other place that there is, and that's hell. Boy, what an uncomfortable topic, right? And the world doesn't like it. As I was studying through this, and something sort of struck a nerve with me, or one of those things where you're reading, it's like, I never saw that before. You've had those moments. And I was looking at the description of hell, and I realized that that really in the description of hell in one way or another, all five senses that you and I have are spoken upon, aren't they? Seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, feeling. I'm going to go from that this morning. I think about as these books are opened and those people who are not in the book of life, I've switched back very quickly to Matthew chapter 25. And in Matthew chapter 25, the Lord says this as he's speaking about in the parable of the talents, those who are not worthy. He says that those who failed this mission, he says, throw out the worthless slave into the outer darkness, in a place where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I think about the idea of seeing. For those who are lost, what are they going to see? You see the phrase outer darkness. I'm sure that you were like me growing up. As a child, weren't you afraid of the dark so many times? And why were you afraid of the dark? Because when you're in the dark, you can't see what's there. You don't know what's there. And you've been like that in the woods before, right? I have. In the woods, it's dark, and you can just feel something, right? And you're running, and you don't even know what you're running from because you're terrified. But can you imagine a place where it is going to be eternally dark? And the kind of darkness that is described is outer darkness. And you look in the original language, it's a darkness really that you can feel. Ever been in darkness like that? Go down into a cave, right? They shut off the light. Or if you go to the desert, when I've told you before in Saudi Arabia, when there's no moon, you're paralyzed because you can feel the darkness. And so looking forward to the clock to rotate to where the sun will just pop up and you can take a breath. But there isn't anything like that there. There is no light. In fact, Jude says it this way when he's speaking about false prophets who have come in to try to destroy the church. He said it's reserved for them the blackness of darkness forever. There's not going to be an end to this darkness. And people sometimes say, and you've heard them say it, I want to go where my loved ones are. Well, number one, no, you don't if they're lost. Number two, understand this. If you go where they are, to a place of outer darkness, do you think in a darkness that you can feel that you're going to be able to see them and comfort them and help them or be comforted by their presence? Friends, you cannot. You will not see them. You will be utterly alone and yet surrounded in outer darkness, in the blackness of darkness. And there won't be any light there. The time for light has passed. Isn't that what Jesus is? Isn't that what Jesus came into the world to be? You read the first chapter of the book of John. He came as a light shining in darkness. He doesn't want us to be in darkness, right? And so he came as a light. And the light still shines today. We can accept the gospel of Christ. We can obey. And we're told in 1 John chapter 4 to walk in the light, right? Why? Because he is in the light. And so we can have light. And that's a wonderful thing about what we're going to talk about next week. The light. But in this place, there's no light. It will be completely dark. And there will be zero comfort. No light. Because light really, it equals hope, doesn't it? Light equals hope. If I can just see a little, I've got some hope. There's no hope there. No hope there. It's an awful place, isn't it, to think about. Just that alone of what you will not see. But as you continue on and you look, and certainly we won't be exhaustive this morning in our description of hell, but by all means, I don't have to describe it and make it worse than it is. What are we going to hear? I shouldn't say we. What are they going to hear? That's what I'm going to say. I'm not going here. I'm not going here. What are they going to hear? Well, he says, in outer darkness, in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Boy, that's a thought, isn't it? You ever been around somebody, and I'm sure some of you ladies or men who worked in the medical field, you've been around people who have been in such severe pain. No medicine really can take the pain away. And what do? They writhe, don't they? They writhe in pain and they groan and they moan because they can get no relief. That's the picture that we have here in the idea of gnashing of teeth. The meaning is really grinding teeth because of such intense pain. You ever see that before? You have probably. You remember in all the movies and the way they used to do things back in Miss Peggy's day when they didn't have anesthesia, right? And they're going in for surgery, and what are they going to do? They're going to stick a big belt in your mouth. They're going to put a stick in your mouth so you can bite down on it and try to grit through the pain. Look, when we're talking about being lost into a devil's hell, weeping and gnashing of teeth is what we're going to hear. And if you've ever had a loved one go through something like that, or you sit by them as they're about to pass from this life, or you sit by them as they're about to go into a surgery or something like that, and they're going through pain, it's exhausting just to hear them going through pain. I can't imagine what it would be like to not be able to see, but to hear suffering, where there is no time limit, where it's going to go on forever and ever. That's the weeping and gnashing of teeth and crying because why didn't we listen? Why didn't I take the opportunity? And the absolute sadness of being separated from God forever and any chance whatsoever of it changing. Oh, the world's going to tell you, yeah, it'll change. Religions are going to tell you it can change. Some of them say you can pay somebody and they'll pray you out of there. Some will say someone else can be baptized for them and you can come out of there. Some will say it's just going to be for a small time, a short time. Some will say you actually are annihilated. You cease to exist altogether. Look, that's not the picture that the book gives. The book gives the picture of weeping and gnashing of teeth for eternity. There's no end to it. Oh, I get scared just talking about it. We go back over to Revelation 20 where we were with our scene of judgment, and we see a few other things here. Not only what we see and what we hear, but what about taste? What about smell? You know, we read in verse 10 of chapter 20 that this is a lake of fire and brimstone. You know what brimstone is? Really, the definition of it, the Greek word of it is burning sulfur. You ever have water like that at your house? You know what I'm talking about? If you ever had a well, a bad well. We used to have a bad well in Texas. We turn on the water and it smelled like I was getting it from the toilet, right? That sulfur smell. It's pungent and it burns your nose, and you can taste it, can't you? When you get a bad batch of sulfur that you smell, you can taste it. This is a lake made of fire and brimstone. This is something that smells horrible. Don't you hate a bad smell? You know, the older I get, I'm more sensitive to some of these smells. And what used to not bother me bothers me now. And I can't imagine having the stench of sulfur in my nose for eternity. And tasting the taste that comes from it, and knowing what we looked at last week, remember in Luke 16 about how the rich man was begging for just a drop of water? There won't be any tasting of water there. It's just going to be an eternity of being parched, tasting sulfur. These are horrible things, don't you think? To think about for all eternity. But then I think about the one that probably we think about most, and that is the feeling, right? You know, some make the mistake of thinking that once we leave this life, we're going to stop feeling. Look, the scriptures teach us otherwise. You know, in Matthew chapter 25, verse 46, we're told that people are going to go away and be tormented eternally. We're told it here in verse 10 that they will be, listen to it, tormented day and night forever and ever in this fire and brimstone. You ever been burned before? I've been burned. When I was a kid, I had a babysitter that shouldn't have been a babysitter and let me make popcorn, and so I took a whole bottle of Wesson oil and poured it into a pot, the whole thing. And then I turned it up on the oven and I let it get as hot as it could get. And I was going to dump the popcorn in it, but it scared me, so I picked up the pot to try to move it. And as I moved it, that oil splashed on my hand. And my fingers for about 3 weeks were webbed together with the blisters. And I just remember the intense pain of just my hand being burned, but the intense pain that just kept me awake. There was nothing to do except for dress it and take care of it, but I was miserable as a kid, and I remember that. And for, you know, we all have things like that. When I come to this and I think of a place where that would never go away, it'd be bad enough it was just my hand, right? We're talking though about existing eternally in a place of burning. That's a terrifying thing. It's a real place. And real people are going to go there. And real people are going to suffer being tormented day and night forever and ever. And there as they burn and cry out and weep and gnash in this total darkness, they'll be crying out and wishing that they had changed and been different in this life. This is a hard place to talk about, isn't it? Because really what I want to promote to people, where I want to spend most of my time and do, is promoting the love of God, right? That's much more comfortable to me, to talk about the love of God. And I don't believe that God intends for me to spend all my time preaching about hell. But if I don't preach about hell, and the time comes that we're all at this judgment scene, and people stand there and say, nobody told me about this. This wasn't in the lessons I heard. Then I'm going to stand accountable. And they're going to suffer as well as me because I didn't preach it. But we have to ponder the question, and I'm sure that you do. How do I respond to somebody? How do I respond to somebody that says, no God of love would make a place like this? No God of love would send anybody there. How do we respond? What can we say to people about that? Here's what I say to people about it. Number one is this, is that this is not God's intention for you. This is not where God wants his family to spend eternity. He doesn't want them to be there. In fact, when you look at the end of Matthew chapter 25 and this condemnation about people who are going to be sent away for eternal punishment, Jesus says it's a place prepared for whom? The devil and his angels. And so it was God's first family, okay, the spiritual family, where they decided, look, we're not happy with what you've done for us. That's another study altogether, but here's the thing. God made hell for the devil and his angels. But understand this. As much as he does not want you to go there, as much as he wants you to fear him, to come to a knowledge of the truth, to have salvation, he has paid and given everything for you and I not to go there. What an insult to have his only son come to the earth, live as you and I, to go through what he did, to suffer upon the cross, and give his life to save those who would look upon him and believe, and then say, it really doesn't matter, everyone come on in. No, the punishment, because God's justice is perfect, the punishment fits the crime. And if the crime is this, rebellion to God as one of his creatures, rebellion to God as someone who's made in his image, that turns and says to him, I'm not going to follow you. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to live how I want to live. Well, then you're going to die, and you're going to die lost. Thing is, I don't want you to die lost. And I know that many of my brethren here don't want you to die lost. And you may be like me as well. Let me ask. Are you one who says, this place is so horrible, but I know I have loved ones going there? Do you? And do you say to yourself, I'm not going to be with them, and it breaks my heart about that. But how am I going to go to heaven and be happy for eternity? You ever think about that question? Here's what I want to encourage you to do. A couple things. Number one, trust the Almighty. Trust him. He said that he's going to take care of that. We're going to talk about it next week. But he said he's going to take care of it. Trust him. And number two, make sure that while we're here, we live in such a way that we don't go to this place. I don't want to find out, okay, how bad this place is. And I'm sure I haven't even done it justice this morning. But I can walk in the light today. And I am walking in the light today. And you are walking in the light today, many of you. And I'm grateful for that, because I don't want any of us to ever find out how horrible a place this is. We could go on. There are other descriptors. I could preach about it all day long. But hopefully this is sufficient enough for you this morning to understand why in the world you would want to obey the gospel. And let's be quite frank, this is the reason most of us did initially. It wasn't because we had this great love for the Lord, right? At least it wasn't for me. This terrified me. My parents taught me, Bible class teachers taught me, and it terrified me. I don't want to go to this place. Yes, I will obey. Now, years later, I don't think about this place very often because I love the Lord and I love living for him, right? But initially, most of us obeyed because of this. How is it we can avoid it? You went back to Revelation chapter 7. Actually, if you looked across the page, if you had my Bible, um, you would see that those who wash their robes are going to have right to the tree of life. That's where we want to go. And you go back to Revelation chapter 7 and you ask, what do you wash your robes in, or how do you wash your robes? What does all that mean? Suffice it to say that John says in Revelation 7 that those who have their name written in the book of life, they've had their robes washed in the blood of Christ. Now that we've talked about, right, for the last several weeks. There's only one way to be washed in the blood of Christ, and that's through being immersed in water, confessing Him, repenting of your sins, and putting Him on in baptism. Then the robes have been washed, and the place we talked about today, you keep putting that behind you. General reminder every once in a while, get back on the right path. You serve the Lord, and this place is a place you'll never have to go to. I hope and pray this morning that this is a lesson you took personal. For those of us who are faithful members, it serves as a reminder of a place we want to avoid, right? But a message we need to remember. If you need to respond to the Lord's invitation this morning, we ask that you come now while we stand and while we sing.